For over 60 years, the ARC Alliance has been in your community, providing support and services for families and individuals with special needs. From birth through life, the ARC Alliance team of experts and specialists are here to find solutions to your needs.
For years, we felt alone as we take care of our son. The ARC Alliance support team brings compassion and understanding to our family and provides hands-on solutions.
The ARC Alliance, we're here to help you today. For more information, call 610-265-4700 or visit thearcalliance.org.
And welcome to the ARC Alliance's Bridges in the Community. My name is Emma Haracre, and I'm the events coordinator here at the ARC Alliance Foundation. Today, I will be your host, and we'll have a discussion with Paul Stengle, the CEO of the ARC Alliance. But before we begin, let me provide you with a few brief overviews of the ARC Alliance. The ARC Alliance was established in 1951 by a group of concerned parents, and today we remain a family focused on charitable organizations that provide a variety of support and services to individuals with disabilities and their families. Several things that we cover are early intervention, which supports children 0 to 3, advocacy, supports coordination, guardianship and rep payee, which supports individuals throughout their entire life, a variety of individuals and family-focused groups and support programs. And in addition to the ARC Alliance, it's a great resource for supports on wide ranges that discuss issues and concerns at the legislative level. For more information, go to our website, www.thearcalliance.org, to check it out. Thanks! Hi guys, today we are here with the CEO of the ARC Alliance, Paul Stengle, and we're going to be talking about the Pennsylvania state budget. Hi Paul, how are you?
I'm doing very good.
That's good. Can you talk a little bit about the budgetary process and how it kind of affects the ARC Alliance here?
The state works on the budget 365 days a year. Election years are a little different than non-election years, but on a non-election year, the different departments start formulating their budget in July and August. So the departments then in September, October make those recommendations to the secretary, and the secretary works on them in October, November. And then they pass it to the governor's office in November, December. It goes to print in January. Then the budget gets to the legislature, usually the first Tuesday in February. Election years, it's different. It's the first Tuesday in March. But then the legislature does appropriation hearings, and they'll vote on the budget, and they're supposed to have the budget approved by July 1st. If that doesn't happen, there's theoretically potential shutdown of funding issues. So the important thing is, as citizens, we need to be able to give input all year round. It is vastly easier if you can get the departments to make recommendations to keep them in. But if the departments in the summer do not make recommendations in the fall, it can be very difficult to get it added. It's easier to keep figures than to add them. So we generally start working with our state officials in the summer, and that is, for example, the Secretary of ODP, trying to get her to support our issues. And again, in the fall, we start working with the Secretary of Human Services, and then and the governor's office, and then in February, we work with the legislators to get funding in or to keep funding in.
So you would say basically, like, if I wanted to start helping out, I should probably start in the summer, like June, July, get on and like start bringing up topics.
Yeah, we know the individuals, so we meet with the individuals. I would recommend before January, from July to January, write the governor, because the governor will see that it gets the right department.
Yeah.
And then in February through July, it's important to contact your legislators. We try to meet with the legislators before the budget goes out. So it doesn't hurt to talk to them before the budget, just to let them know where you stand. Because once the budget comes out, it is the major discussion in Harrisburg. It can be hard to get to legislators, but in December and in January, it can be a lot easier. There's a lot less on their table. So again, I think as a parent or an advocate, I would be writing the governor the first 6 months of the fiscal year, July through December, and then I'd be writing my legislators January through July.
And can you talk about a little bit on how we should be presenting our argument to them in a well-rounded way that they can hear us, understand us, but we also don't cause a fight in a sense?
Well, it's important when you contact legislators, you use the right titles, and if you write letters, use the right titles unless you have a personal relationship. And I try to make my relationships with legislators as personal as I can, but if I don't know them, it's representative, last name, it's not Phil or Bob or Mary. But if I know them, I'll use the first name, but you don't want to necessarily offend them. But the best way, frankly, is to tell your story so they understand the need. So personal stories go a long way with legislators. Legislators generally want to do the right thing, and when they hear our stories, they generally want to support us. Again, the other way you get support from legislators is you donate money and you hire a lobbyist. And we cannot afford lobbyists, and we are bipartisan, and we don't raise money for candidates. But because we can't do that, we have to sell them on the importance of supporting people with developmental disabilities. So parents should tell their story. If you're meeting with a legislator and they'll meet with you, I would bring your child along so they understand, what challenges you have as a parent of a disabled child. But those personal stories have been the foundation of any of our legislative activities and have been fairly successful.
That's good. Do you think it's important to know all of the details of a budget in order to advocate for yourself and for others who have individuals with disabilities?
No, I think the messages that we have are pretty clear. End the waiting list, increased salary of direct care staff. I wouldn't say you should cut this. I wouldn't talk against funding of other things.
Yeah.
I would talk about your funding needs. And you don't have to figure out where the money comes from. I know sometimes legislators will say, where are we going to get the money? That's their job, not your job. I was asked that one time by a legislator, and I started telling him, and he said, I really don't want to know. He was just trying to accent the point that there's a limitation of funds. But no, you don't know the issue. You don't have to know the details of the issue or the funding. What's the federal funding, state funding? Frankly, I know very few people that understand that system. But the important thing is the message. We need funding to address whatever issue we're talking about.
Are you optimistic that this administration and legislators will be able to come to an agreement to increase funds with individuals with disabilities and autism?
Well, there's good news and there's bad news.
As always.
The good news, I think Governor Josh Shapiro, who is a Montgomery County resident, had a long history of being involved with disability issues. When he worked for Joe Hoffer in the 80s, Joe was always a supporter of disabilities, and as Joe Hoffer's lead staff, he understood those issues. Serving as county commissioner made him aware of those issues. I think Josh has a sensitivity to those issues. So we're hopeful that he will push our agenda. We don't know yet. We're going to have to see. It's pretty early in his governorship. The legislators, we've always been successful in getting bipartisan support, and I expect we'll get bipartisan support today. But as we all know, there's a lot of contention between the far left and the far right, and the Democratic Republican Party are not working well together. Yesterday, there was a election for some vacant seats in the House in Pennsylvania, and they were all won by Democrats. So hopefully the House will begin to be able to function because it really has not functioned because of the vacancy and not knowing who will have the majority. But we'll have to see. I'm always optimistic that people will work together, particularly on our issues. But there is a great deal of contention in Harrisburg and in Washington.
Yeah. When we're talking about funding, is it more of a state issue or more of a federal issue?
The state drives how much federal funds we get, but a major portion of community services are paid through federal Medicare funds through CMS. Each state gets a match on those funds. Pennsylvania, if they spend $42, they get $58 from the federal government. So that is extremely important. But the federal government just doesn't tell you how much they're going to give you. You have to say how much you're going to match. It's a very good investment for the state because, again, you spend $42, you get $58 of federal money. And that is the major funding, so it's a joint effort. There are special projects that get funded occasionally, and they're both from the federal and the state. We were very lucky that the federal government did a lot of COVID relief funding, and we were able to get funding for that, which was very important. The state also funds different initiatives. So it's important to get the state to go after the big dollars in the Medicaid, Medicare funding, but you have to watch all the funding streams and see where you can maximize the resources for people with disability. It's a fairly complex system.
Can you give more information on how President Biden's Build Back a Better America would address funding issues for people with IDD and autism?
Well, the Build Back America had in it initially substantial funding to increase the salary of direct care staff. And as most of us know, there is a major crisis in recruiting staff to work in community programs like workshops and group homes. That money did not get through the Build Back Better legislation. Now, Senator Casey, who's been a very good friend of disabilities, is reproposing a law that would is called Better Care, Better Jobs, and that would provide substantial funding to increase salaries of direct care staff. It also would change the match that I was talking about of the 42%, 58%. It would change it to 32 and 68%, which would be a lot of additional funding the state would have to be able to do programming. We're certainly going to be watching that legislation and supporting the legislation. But as we talked about earlier, I'm not sure how much success we're going to have on the federal level of getting something through the House and Senate to get to Biden's desk.
If the funding issue facing people with IDD and autism are not addressed, do you foresee a crisis in the community-based services?
There is a crisis in the community-based services. Individuals who are on our waiting list get funding, and there are no providers willing to take them because they can't recruit the staff. There are providers who have 45, 50% vacancy rates. You cannot provide a service when you have that level of vacancy rates. We're lucky right now. The ARC has a 5% vacancy rate, but I can tell you that is highly unusual in the community-based system. There are some group home providers who are still managing to do a quality job, but there are a lot of residential providers who just can't provide the service I know they want to provide because they can't recruit staff, because they can't afford to pay staff.
Right. Why is there such a discrepancy between the funding of institutions as opposed to the funding of community programs? Specifically in institutional costs are about 3 times greater than like the community-based costs.
Well, there are a lot of reasons why that. When you purchase a community service, you only have to purchase the services that you need. Where if you're an institution, you may not need nursing care, you get nursing care. You may not need someone to cook for you, but you have
get someone.
So there's more expense because you had to do the full package. One of the other problems with the institutional care is the institutions have been around decades, if not hundreds of years, and the infrastructure is in terrible condition. Things like most of the institutions produce all their water, handle all their storage, have a heating system, and those systems are in terrible shape. There's a lot of lead pipe, which is a concern. There's a lot of asbestos in the institutions. So in order to keep those institutions running and not even correcting necessarily the problem, but doing triage is a great deal of funding. The major difference, though, between institution and community care is individuals in the institution make a lot more money and get a lot more benefits than the community care. So I'd like to see those prices, the cost being closer, because we're paying as well in the community as we're paying in the institution. But our position against institutions is not a dollar issue. We know through numerous studies that people do better in the community. And we know when people understand the choice of being in an institution or a community, almost 99.9% of the time they choose community. So we try to see that people with disability get the service they want, i.e. in the community, and it happens to be a lot less costly.
Yeah, we're all humans, and humans are community-based at our core. That's just like, we saw that just in people during COVID time, like how we missed the community when we weren't around. And a
lot of legislators, I've said, the day you want to move into an institution, I'll support institutions. I haven't got anybody taking up on the offer.
So Governor Shapiro will be coming out with his budget early this March. Do you have any expectations on funding increase that may or may not be in the budget?
I'm hoping that Governor Shapiro in the next budget will have significant improvements. He really has inherited Wolf's staff's recommendations, and he doesn't have a lot of time, I think, to put in a lot of his initiatives. I anticipate, like always for years, individuals graduating out of the IU will get funding for day programs, so they don't have to sit at home, and I assume that. I assume that there will be some dollars to address the waiting list, which is important, and I think Josh will see that is in there. And I'm hoping that there is some funding to increase rates so we can fund community services. Although that is not as likely, I think, as money for the waiting list and money for graduates. Again, I'm hopeful that Josh is sensitive to the issue and will propose a budget that addresses our needs, but realistically, we may have to give him a year before he is able to put the type of budget together we want. And there's no guarantee. We're going to have to work with Governor Shapiro over the next year to make sure he understands it. And it's helpful. As I said before, Governor Shapiro came from Montgomery County. His Secretary of Human Services was Montgomery County Commissioner. We have a relationship. She's a very good individual, and I think she is sensitive to our issues. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to work with the administration to improve the lives of people with disabilities.
That's good. Can you talk about what families should be asking legislators and the governor for?
We do not tell people what they should ask for.
Maybe, how about some top, maybe like 5 things that they should be talking or asking for?
I think the important thing is to tell your story, and if your story is, my child is 50 years old and I'm 80 years old and I need placement, you want to talk about funding the waiting list and tell those stories. If your child is in a group home, you want to tell those stories, and you want to ask for funding to increase the rates. And again, if your son's in a group home and you say the staff turnover about 50% each year, and that's what the figure is, which is scary, I think you need to say those messages. We have a number of pieces of legislation that we're working on. You can go on our webpage and look at that. But again, I think you have to tell your story and tell what your needs are. Again, we are not able to pay for high-priced lobbyists. We're not able to give PAC money. So we're basing on the moral necessity of our story, and the legislators have responded well to that.
If individuals watching this broadcast want to support the ARC Alliance and provision of services, are there advocacy activists, and how should they go about joining our advocacy?
Well, if you go on the ARC of PA or the ARC of US's webpage, they will have legislative issues. Mm-hmm. And you type in your address, it will tell you your legislator, and it will give you a selection of topics that you would like to mail to. Mm-hmm. Or could mail to. So if one of those issues appear that you want to address, you tap it and it actually will write you an email, and then you can edit it by adding your personal story. Frankly, 1 out of 10 families have a child with IDD. I'm willing to bet probably 1 out of 20 families have a child with autism. If all those families would write,
the mail would get so clogged up.
We would be in a great funding situation. I vote Republican and Democrat, but I vote disabilities. Mm-hmm. I can tell you most parents of children with disabilities do not vote disabilities. They vote budget, taxes, guns, and choices around pro-life. If we would only vote disability, we would own the world. We would have the 30% of the population who is supportive of our issues. So again, what I'd recommend is looking at those issues. I also think parents should call their legislator and say, I want to meet and talk about my experience of having a child with disability.
Why is it essential for Pennsylvania to increase special education funding?
We were working very hard, I'm giving my age away at 72, to get the right to education. And when that came through, the federal government committed to 40% reimbursement of special education. So they would pay 40% of what the school districts had to pay. And they never came close to it. Education funding is a problem. We know that poor school districts do less well than more wealthy school districts. And frankly, I don't think school districts should have to pay as much of the freight as they do in property taxes. I think the feds should come up with a 40% match they pledged, and I think Pennsylvania, who funds special education, in my opinion, pretty well, but should be doing a little better, should continue to do that. But if the feds came through and matched the 40%, it would dramatically improve the quality of education. And there are school districts that do not do a good job in special education, and if you ask them why, they blame funding. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know quality special education costs, quality education for all children costs, and I think Pennsylvania and the federal government have to be at the table supporting them.
Well, thank you for sitting down with me and talking about the budget today. I don't have any more questions. So any last remarks before we sign off?
If anybody's interested in any legislative questions or wants any pointers, please give us a call. We would love to talk to you. We arrange meetings probably twice a year with our legislators. We do legislative breakfast in the 3 counties, and we'd like parents to be there to tell the story. It's much more meaningful to legislators to hear from families than from me. So please give us a call. Our number is 610-265-4700, and feel free to call me and we can talk about it.
Well, thank you once again for sitting down and talking with us today.
Thank you very much for interviewing me.